This is the first of a new monthly webinar series that we're going to be running at the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies, taking a view on criminal justice developments in the previous month. So today we'll be talking about criminal justice developments in September. Now, just a couple of things about this particular session. First of all, we're not aiming for comprehensive coverage of everything that's happened. And I'm sure that there will be attendees at this and future webinars will think, oh, you should have talked about this or you should have talked about that. So one of the things that we want to do over time is invite suggestions about future coverage items, and we'll be sharing more information about how you can do that in the follow-up email. We're also not claiming an expertise on every issue we're discussing today. All our panelists today, for sure, I like to think have expertise in some areas, but none of us are experts on everything that we're covering. And indeed, there'll be people in the audience today who know far more about a particular issue than individual members of the panel. So what we're really aiming for here is an informed but informal conversation about criminal justice developments in the previous month. Hopefully drawing on the experience that we all might have, and also the experience and ideas of the audience, but not claiming to have the final word or the authoritative take on any given item. Now, if you'd like to participate in the discussion this morning, we have the Q&A question and answer function open. So put your questions in there, or any question you'd like to pose to the panel. And if you particularly like the question, then what you can do is also you can upvote it, and the more upvotes any question has, the more likely it is to be answered. But we're also covering a range of issues today. So once we've moved on to the next item, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go back to answer a question or pick up a question which relates to an item that we've now finished talking about. So get your questions in early if you want to have them picked up on. In terms of the areas that we're going to be covering today, we're going to start with a bit of a discussion about police legitimacy and accountability following the awful murder of Sarah Everard. We're then going to talk about some developments in the House of Commons Justice Committee. First, a report that's come out in September on mental health in prisons, and then also a bit of a discussion about the inquiry that's just been announced in the last week or two on the Indeterminate Sentence for Public Protection, the so-called IPP sentence. We'll then have a brief discussion about ministerial changes in the Ministry of Justice, particularly the appointment of Dominic Raab as the new Justice Secretary. We're going to be talking a bit about a report from the Independent Office for Police Conduct on police use of tasers, then a bit about police spying on political activists, and then we're going to conclude with a discussion on a recent exhibition which has just closed at the Institute of Contemporary Art. So a fairly packed programme of activities. I think we should move straight on to the discussion, and I'm delighted to be joined by three panelists who will also be participating in the discussion today. My colleague Matt Ford from the Centre, Donna Mooney from UNGRIP, works on the areas of IPP sentence, and Katrina French from Unjust, working in the areas of racial justice and justice in the justice system, stop and search, and related areas. There's more information about all of those panelists on our website, and so do look that up if you want to have any more information. So first of all, police legitimacy. Now, Wayne Custons, a serving Metropolitan Police officer at the time that he raped, kidnapped and murdered Sarah Everard, was sentenced to a whole life sentence just last week. And he'd used the COVID regulations as a pretext to conduct a bogus arrest of Sarah Everard. There were a number of accusations of indecent exposure and other things made against Custons when he was an officer at Kent Police, and of indecent exposure in London just days before he murdered Sarah Everard. It's worth remembering also that according to the Femicide Index compiled by Karen Ngala Smith, at least 80 women have been killed by men since Custons murdered Sarah Everard. So this is not a unique situation, though it was a very disturbing situation given his role within the Metropolitan Police. Speaking at the Conservative Party conference just yesterday, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, announced an independent inquiry to ensure, as she said, that something like this can never happen again. And she announced that, or the Home Office later announced that the inquiry would look both at Custons' behaviour in the run-up to the murder of Sarah Everard, and also some wider questions of police vetting and procedures around police vetting and workplace standards. Now, meanwhile, while all this is going on, the Metropolitan Police drew widespread criticism after advising that women concerned about the action of lone male police officers should consider shouting out to passerby, running into a house, knocking on a door, waving a bus down, or if you are in a position to do so, calling 999. Speaking on the day that Custons was sentenced, Zoe Billingham from the Inspectorate of Constabulary said this: "I think this is a watershed moment for policing. I think that we cannot abide by the narrative that this was a one-off, that he was a bad 'un. I think every force now in the country must look to re-establish trust and legitimacy, because what Wayne Custons did to Sarah Everard has struck a hammer blow to the heart of policing legitimacy in England and Wales." So let's pick up some of these themes and start really with Katrina. Katrina, I mean, what do you make of Zoe Billingham's assessment? It's struck a hammer blow at the heart of policing legitimacy in England and Wales. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, most definitely. I think I'll start by thanking CCJS for having me on the panel this morning. Thank you, Richard, and apologies for the technical issues with me joining earlier and then leaving. I also want to say condolences to Sarah's family, to friends of Sarah, to anybody that knew her. I think I'm quite angry, really angry with the, dare I say, advice. I don't want to call it advice. The tosh that came out of senior leaders' mouths last week in terms of the onus being on women to fix this, and actually hearing what Zoe said about it striking a chord at the heart of policing. I think here's where intersectionality comes in as a Black woman, the heart of policing. That legitimacy has been lost many years ago, and I think it's really, in many ways, it's sad that this has happened and tragic, but there's an opportunity now to kind of pick the stone up and look at all the moss underneath and say we need to do more. And this isn't just about misogyny, it's about all the isms and schisms, it's about structural discrimination, essentially, whether that be sexism, racism, ableism, whatever it is. So yeah, I think what she said struck a chord with me in terms of what do we do next? How do we hold the police to account? How do we ensure that people, specifically women, feel safe, to go to the police for help, but also serving police officers within the police? There's been lots of murmurings there that actually is a sexist organisation. Women don't feel comfortable calling out their fellow officers because if they're in times of need and they need those officers, they may be ostracised and actually could potentially lose their life if the situation was really dire. So I think it is a watershed moment. But it's really weird when we look at policing because we have different watershed moments for different groups. So obviously for the 80s, we had Black communities. Now it feels for the last year or so, especially, there's been something about women. So we had the death of the murder of the two sisters and the police officers that took photos of those and shared that in a WhatsApp group. So this for me isn't about individual officers, it's about the culture of policing. And I think we really have a timely opportunity. It's a pity that the Home Secretary is trying to keep her inquiry quite narrow and kind of identifying Custons and the bad apple narrative. But I think if we're going to be bold and we're going to be brave, every force across the country should be looking at its processes, not just for vetting, but also for complaints against officers, for supporting women within the service, whether they be civilians or serving officers, to talk out and speak out about what exactly happening. Because if this is happening to people outside of service, God knows what's happening inside the police.
No, thank you. And I think it's that point about police culture more broadly I think is very important. I mean, I'm sure I wasn't the only one who listened to an interview with Palm Sandhu, former, now retired Metropolitan Police officer, speaking again on the day that Custons was sentenced, and this is what she told the World at One. The police service is very sexist and misogynist. A lot of women will not report their colleagues because what happens is the male police officers will then close ranks. And the fear that most women police officers have got is that when you're calling for help, you press that emergency button on your radio, they're not going to turn up and you're going to get kicked in on the street. So you've got to be very careful and weigh which battles you can fight and which battles you can win. And I mean, in one sense, anybody who's kind of worked with or studied police over the years, and Katrina, you've had a lot of dealings with the police over the years. In one sense, I guess there's nothing surprising there, but it is also quite shocking. And I mean, in a good way, in a sense, I guess, shocking to hear a senior former police officer spell it out in such blunt terms.
It is shocking, but I think this is also part of the problem, is we're forever speaking out after something. So that culture of silence or complicit nature, and I'm not for the officer that I can totally understand, you're fearing for your life, you don't know what's going to happen, but why is it that we have to wait for the death of an innocent woman walking home? I won't say a wholly blameless victim as though the judge did, because I didn't even understand what that stupid thing he said was, but how does it take that to have people calling stuff out? So I think there definitely is a problem. I'm just going to bring up, and it's a tangent note, but Robin Williams, the police officer that the Met sacked because she had indecent images on her phone that was sent to her by her sister, even though it was proven that she hadn't looked at the images. She was sacked from her job. This man is going around flashing people, from my understanding, and he's still been able to keep a badge and walk around. Now, for me, this goes to the heart of why the police aren't trusted within communities, because you treat people differently, and then within the service, you're not only just sexist and misogynist, you're racist too, because you're allowing people who are known to actually, I think their colleagues called him the rapist, and that for me was also very perverse, very troubling, because we have officers, serving officers, calling another serving officer a rapist, which is probably one of the most heinous crimes a person could commit. And this is the banter that is being shared in the canteen. Very, very disheartening, especially, as I said, we had the case of Robin last year, who upstanding, did great work around Grenfell, acknowledged she had made a mistake, sacked from her job, put on the sex offenders register. And we've actually got a sex offender. Sorry, I'm getting a bit irate here. A sex offender serving, goes on to rape somebody, strangle them, and then we're just, oh, it was a one-off. It's not a one-off. There's clearly a culture about how you handle and manage people who are known to potentially be threats to not just to officers but to society, and you don't do anything about that. And I think there is a culture of misogyny. I think there is a culture of racism. I think there is a culture of protecting one's own, and often it will be women that fall short of that, because it is kind of an old boys club still, and that is in spite of there being a female commissioner. And I really think that we have to stop looking at kind of performative, not as their performative appointments, no disrespect to Cressida, but just having a woman doesn't mean that the police aren't misogynist. And I think that we have to look past the veneer that we keep being put out by the Home Secretary and the senior police, and really starting to question, what is it to have legitimacy? What does public safety mean? So yeah, I thought I had to bring in Robin, because I was really torn that this for me shows the differential treatment, but also why we need to have a real conversation about reforming police, what community safety means, how do we get more people involved in holding the police to account, and it shouldn't just be knowing your rights, it should be a much more collective effort.
So, I mean, we have the inquiry that Priti Patel announced. On census, this didn't seem to be on the cards even a few days ago, and caught a number of people by surprise when she announced it. But I think, as you've indicated, Katrina, it's fairly narrowly drawn in terms of the terms of reference, as far as we can tell. I guess we'll have to wait and see, when the full terms of reference are published. So, if we're thinking about that kind of more transformative change of policing, which is clearly needed, it feels there's so much that needs to be done. It's kind of almost difficult to know where to start with this, because, as you say, it's not just about misogyny, and it's not just about racism, and it's not just about ableism. It's about the whole package, actually. And how we can make sense of that, and is it even possible or feasible to move towards a kind of policing that maybe many people in this country would like to see? Sorry, that's a really big kind of question. I don't know whether Donna or Matt have any thoughts on that, or indeed obviously Katrina as well. I mean, maybe it's a rhetorical question at this point, I'm not sure. No. All right, no one wants to pick up on that one. Okay, so I think let's just move this discussion on a bit. So one of the other things that Zoe Billingham said last week when she was talking about this is she was asked towards the end of the interview whether she would have confidence if she was alone on a dark night and a lone male police officer approached her, whether she would feel comfortable about that, or whether she would feel comfortable going to seek the help of a lone male police officer. And this is what she said: "At this moment in time, like any other woman, I have concerns and reservations." And again, it just feels to me that, I mean, this is a kind of a senior inspector in the Inspectorate of Constabulary saying this, and I just found that quite an extraordinary remark that was made. We have a comment here from Jenna that's come in. Maybe one of our panelists might like to answer this or reflect on it. If the police can't be held accountable when misconduct and crimes are known, how do we correct the standards of policing? They cover for each other, making it departmental misconduct. I mean, it's a kind of a statement as much as a question. I don't know whether Matt or Donna or Katrina might like to add any comments or build on that remark at all. No? As you can see, this is our first webinar, so we're still feeling our way really on what it means to have a kind of a fairly relaxed and informal conversation.
Richard, I will say, I think that is a poignant point of who polices the police. Has been a question for eons for like the Black community in terms of like trust and confidence. And I think we'll talk about this, but the spy cops thing, there's just a whole, not culture within policing, but also it feels in politics at the moment that the police are given carte blanche powers to do what they want. And I think that's the concern is we have a consensus that we're meant to police by consent, and that doesn't seem to be happening. It doesn't feel as though police inside want to challenge policing. So if they can't challenge inside, how does the civilian on the outside have an opportunity? We've obviously got the IOPC, we've got the Her Majesty's Inspectorate, but I think having more structures and systems isn't the issue. I think we really need to have a real honest conversation around what we want from our police. And it sounds really new, but I think we really need to start reimagining what policing looks like. And what safety, and maybe having budgets that don't just push more money into police, but look at other community alternatives means that we wouldn't necessarily have to, and I don't want to say rely on the police, but the police have to be all things to all people. And sometimes I think that's where we've stretched them, and actually looking at priorities for society, what matters to people, and then having that conversation leads us to understanding what do we need the police to do, as opposed to thinking we need them all of the time. And that's not me saying police don't have a role to play in society. It's just me saying, with all what's going on inside, I think there's a real ripe conversation for, in the 21st century, what does policing look like? And, how do we want people to treat people, and how do we hold people to account? And we shouldn't be relying on old mechanisms that we know don't work.
No, thank you very much, Katrina. Dana, did you? Yes, Donna.
I think that this whole idea of accountability is an interesting one, because you do, my focus is generally on prisons, but it's the same issue with accountability in the sense that you have, independent people coming in and giving recommendations, and those recommendations generally then sit on the shelf and collect dust and nothing happens. And so if that is the level of accountability, then nothing is ever going to change. So it's, what is then done with that? And then you can't be expected not to see scenes at like Clapham Common for Sarah, because people will essentially come back to the streets if they don't feel they're being listened to, and they will mobilise, which I don't actually think is a problem. But it's showing you that I think that parliamentary route, that kind of political, that institutional route
is very difficult because institution seems in many cases to cover. And I think what the lady said from the HMIC was very interesting as a kind of senior person. But if I'm really honest, I think it's in step with the music of the day. So it would be very weird for someone to come out and say, well, actually, apart from Cressida Dick, I feel completely safe to go up to a police officer. You just kind of, you know, dare I say, you'd be hanging yourself to say that. I don't necessarily, and it's not me, I don't know her true intention as to whether she really believes that though. But I know in this moment, it's the buzz thing to say is that, you know, people don't feel safe. Whether they do or they don't, I don't think many people would say they would talk out against it.
Thank you. And I think to just pick up on that, on a comment you made earlier, Katrina, about who polices the police, I think, you know, one of the answers currently from the Met, and indeed the Prime Minister endorsed this position just a few days ago, is it seems to be the answer is bus drivers. And, you know, as a kind of a serious answer to a very serious problem, I struggle really to kind of think how anybody think that's a kind of a reason.
But even in rural areas, Richard, just thinking outside of the box, that was such a metropolitan thing to say, because there's places where you're in the rural area, you see a bus every half an hour. What you meant to do, wait on a country lane for the, you know, next bus to come. It didn't feel like it rang true. And that's the other thing, is instead of saying nothing or thinking about a proper strategy, it always feels that people are quick to speak. And then we end up having to dissect what rubbish has been spoken, as opposed to having the mind space to really think about viable solutions.
Thank you very much. All right, well, this is last month in criminal justice, looking at the developments in criminal justice in September, and the panelists today alongside me, Richard Garside and Matt Ford from the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies, Donna Mooney from UNGRIP and Katrina French from Unjust. The next item we're going to look at is picking up on the question of Parliament and politics, and particularly the work of the Justice Committee. Now, first of all, looking at mental health in prisons. More than 2/3 of prisoners may be living with mental health issues, according to a recent report, yet only 1 in 10 of all prisoners are receiving any kind of mental health support. Now, in a report published in September, Mental Health in Prison, the House of Commons Justice Committee argued that there was a mental health crisis, one that would continue unless root and branch reform took place. Writing about the prison service a week or two ago in The Spectator, Ian Aitchison, visiting professor of Staffordshire University, asked, why is an organisation that asks its staff to call convicted prisoners residents content to hold them in places the RSPCA would close down if they housed livestock? So what is the challenge when it comes to mental health in prison? Is it about the lack of good services, or are prisons themselves making prisoners sick? Donna, the UNGRIP made a submission to the mental health inquiry. So do you want to start maybe by just telling us a little bit about the concerns that you raised in your submission, and then what you make of the report?
Yeah, so our focus was solely on those serving an IPP sentence, which is essentially a sentence that was abolished in 2012, still has, I think, over 3,000 people in prison serving it. Most were given a very minimum tariff. I think 96% are now over tariff. Some of those are by 10 years or more. And so, well, you know, there obviously is a huge mental health issue within prisons, but what we do know is that those serving an IPP sentence suffer mental health at a much higher level because of the indeterminate nature of the sentence, and they're not knowing when they're going to get out and if they're going to get out, and kind of they often lose hope. So the self-harm and suicide rates are extremely high for those serving an IPP sentence. In fact, I think it's 70% higher for both self-harm and suicide rates for both for anyone on the sentence. So when the opportunity came up to submit something, we wanted to, because it's such a huge issue. And you know, within the submissions, we asked families to submit evidence that we could then put forward in this report, alongside the evidence that is proven to show that this is true. So, you know, all of the statistical evidence. And so, you know, I think we felt that it was an opportunity to kind of flag up this issue, because, you know, not only is the sentence causing people to have extremely severe mental health issues, they're also not given the support with that. So if they do manage to get released, they're then recalled because they're coming out with no support for their mental health, or they're just lost in the system because their mental health is so bad that then they're then deemed too dangerous to be released because of the damage it's done to them. So, you know, that is the reason that we submitted the report. And I think all the other thing that we know ourselves from having kind of direct experience with this is the lack of support with mental health in prisons. And almost for many, they're punished if they are showing signs of mental health, mental health issues or psychosis, and which again will then just make that situation a lot worse for them. So, again, the report was predominantly around IPP and kind of the damage it's done to people's mental health, and that idea that that's then keeping many people in and nothing's being done to support them.
I think that sort of picks up, I think, a really kind of an important point, which is, I mean, over the years, I've obviously followed the Justice Committee and its work, and I have, an enormous amount of respect for the MPs who, over the years, have worked on that committee, and their reports are always worth reading. And they think often very long and hard, and they take a range of evidence from organisations, and often produce some very good recommendations. But one of the things about those committee reports, and I kind of wonder whether this is the case with this one as well, is they're often much better at thinking through how you can manage the problem rather than kind of thinking about where is this problem coming from in the first place. So for sure, if you have somebody who's gone to prison and they have a pre-existing mental health problem, and they're not getting the support they need, the mental health interventions that they need in order to help them manage their condition, that's something that is worth obviously investigating and doing something about. But I think, as you've indicated, certainly with IPP prisoners, so it's not just IPP prisoners. Actually, what do you do with a situation where it's the imprisonment itself, which is, I mean, in common parlance, driving someone a bit mad? How do you, in what way is it a kind of a meaningful or reasonable response to just kind of make sure they're taking the right medication, when it's actually the structure of their existence and their experiences which are really causing them problems?
I think that's the thing. I think, I think there's been a shift as well in people who are being sent to prison, like the reasons for that. And I think if mental health was dealt with in the community better, and they weren't and drug use and things like that, you would have a lot less people in prison, and you'd have a lot less people in prison with mental health issues. But it gets to a point where people are then just being sent to prison where it's been triggered by a mental health issue, and then you put them in a situation that is only going to make their mental health far worse. And I'm not for IPPs, but for the rest of the prison population, they then come back out into the community having had none of that addressed, none of that support. So it then perpetuates that issue, and even more so for people on an IPP sentence because of the extreme damage the sentence has done to their mental health. And I think, my personal opinion is that there's a very disjointed approach to mental health teams and the prison service. And my experience is that there's a bit of a divide in how far people from the mental health team can go with support if they're getting pushback from people within the prison system who are then viewing maybe a mental health episode as someone misbehaving. There's this kind of disjointed approach to it, which I think is another issue.
Yeah, I know that's a kind of an interesting point. And I mean, some years ago we worked with Edwina Grosvenor and a number of others on a project called One Small Thing, and that was looking at trauma-informed practice in prisons. And the principle there that we were really pressing, indeed, One Small Thing, continues to, and indeed has, I think, a growing influence, and is doing some really excellent work. That actually when you're approaching somebody in a custodial setting, you kind of almost assume from the get-go that they probably have some unresolved issues in their lives, which might help to explain some of their behaviour. And if you can, adopt a trauma-informed approach, then that might be helpful in preventing maybe problems escalating, and a situation which could just be an argument escalating into a fight, for example, or a major standoff. And, that kind of strikes me as important, but again, is a kind of a form of managing the problem, really. And without doubt, hopefully managing it in a better way, but not really, getting to the heart of the problem. Matt, I'm not sure whether you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of, come in on your, original question, which is about whether, prisons are making prisoners sick. And we could talk about, the evidence around that, but I think it's a much better exercise, to demonstrate the point. So I think under COVID, we've all had a tiny taste of what it might be like to be imprisoned. We've been locked in our houses, and for some people, that's been tiny flats. You're not allowed to see your family, friends and community. You've got a lack of stimulation and a lack of purposeful activity, fear that you might be harmed, and feeling like your life is being wasted. And the result of that is an explosion of mental health problems in the community. So that's the kind of environment that prison always is. And the lockdown in prison, for which there's now, loads of evidence emerging about the mental health effects, was just a double lockdown, essentially. It's an intensification of the environment that already existed. And I'm reminded of some work we did in 2017, which was about veterans in prison, actually, armed forces veterans in prisons. And we had a senior civil servant who was involved in prisoner mental health speak at an event, and he sort of started going off on this rant about how the prison environment basically, includes all the determinants of mental health problems like depression, anxiety, that we're aware of some of the things I've just listed. And he said we should stop doing research on this group of people, people with mental health problems. And I kind of got a bit excited, but he was just going to say, why we're researching, let's just get them out of there, basically, and treat them in the community. Instead, he just said we should be researching the group that doesn't have mental health problems in prison to work out what they have that makes them resilient and design interventions around them. So, but that was basically an admission from the inside, that the prison environment, is causing harm to people in prison. But I think there's another point which Donna has just alluded to about prisons and mental health. And that's if we look at, the best evidence around prevalence, which is from the last time they did a full-scale survey of the mental health of prisoners in 1997, I think it was, it's quoted in the Justice Committee report, which showed that 72% of prisoners have 2 or more diagnosable mental health conditions, which is an astonishing number. But I think it does indicate something about prisons, like I said, that it's a response to mental health problems, as well as other things, poverty and so on, substance abuse. And the Justice Committee report actually admits it. So in some of the opening pages, I was honestly astonished to read this as well. I didn't actually know some of this stuff. But so on pages 4 and 5, it says, the identification of mental illness in a prisoner can happen at different stages for different individuals before or during time in custody, including where the police are called if a person in a mental health crisis behaves in a way that worries or affects others. So why is that person being criminalised for a start if they're in a mental health crisis? An acutely mentally ill person in the process of being prosecuted is held on remand because no mental health bed is available in the community. Remand prisoners have a very high risk of suicide and self-harm. The idea that you put someone with a known mental health problem on remand is astonishing, because there's no service in the community. And a person is the other one is a person is suitable for a community order that includes a requirement for mental health treatment, but that treatment is not available and the sentencer decides on prison instead. So they're put in a far more harmful environment because services aren't available in the community. I was honestly astonished to read some of that. That's that explicit about prison is basically a response to mental health problems. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of, what you would do about that, like I said, I agree with Donna. I think one of the key things is support service in the community, properly funded, comprehensive. I think that I would be interested to know what effect that actually would have on, the prison population, because I imagine it'd be quite substantial. But also, improve mental health services in prisons, but in tandem with the community, so that it doesn't, have an expansive effect of sentences saying, well, we'll send them to prisons because there might be mental health treatment there, because it isn't available in the community. Yeah.
Thank you very much. time is always behind, not on our side. So I think we need to move on. But just very quickly on the Justice Committee itself, we'll circulate the details if you want to look at that report in the follow-up email. And it's worth remembering that in addition to the report itself, you can also find all the evidence, including the evidence that Donna and her colleagues submitted, on the committee pages. And if you're really a glutton for punishment, you can read the entire transcript of all the hearings, or indeed watch the sessions themselves. And as I said, there's always some really, even if it doesn't get into the final report, there's always a lot of useful and important information that comes out in any committee inquiry. And this is true of the Justice Committee, the Home Affairs Committee, that we may well discuss in future events and others. All right, let's move on to another issue relating to the Justice Committee, which is about the new inquiry that they've launched on indeterminate sentences for public protection. And just a reminder, do put your questions in the Q&A if you want to pose a question to the panel, or if you just want to make a general point. So this month, the House of Commons Justice Committee announced an inquiry into indeterminate sentences for public protection, the so-called IPP sentence. Introduced under the Criminal Justice Act 2003, the IPP sentence is in effect a form of life sentence that can be given to hundreds of different kinds of crimes, including some fairly minor crimes. It was abolished in 2012, but more than 3,000 people, as Donna mentioned earlier, continue to languish in prison on IPP sentences because the abolition was not retrospective. There's widespread agreement that something needs to be done about this. Speaking in 2016, the former Justice Secretary Ken Clarke, who pushed through the legislation abolishing the IPP, said, quote, "It is quite absurd that there are people who might be there for the rest of their lives in theory, who are serving a sentence which Parliament agreed to get rid of." And last year, the former Supreme Court Justice Lord Browne described IPP as the greatest single stain on our criminal justice system. And Lord Blunkett, the former Labour Home Secretary who actually introduced the sentence, has himself spoken of his deep regret over the sentence and has himself called for far-reaching reform. Now, Donna, UNGRIP has been doing a lot of work in this area, and you also have experience in relation to family members who've been caught up in the IPP sentence. So just tell us a little bit more about IPP, the effect that it's had on the lives of those that you work with and connect with through your work.
I think the biggest thing is that there is a huge ripple effect. The sentence doesn't just affect the person who's serving it, it affects their entire family and their children and so on and so forth. So, we have a lot of contact with families who we try and offer support with, and I think, they are obviously trying to support their loved ones either in prison or in the community. And, the struggles that they have, I mean, the initial struggle is getting out of prison. As I said, there's still, I think, it's almost 2,000 people who are still in prison, never been released. And most of those people are over tariff now. So, for some family members, it's tough for them, and it affects their own mental health. Because the longer that they're unreleased, the more damage it's doing. And for some of those people in prison, they've given up complete hope of ever being released. They've had loved ones who've died while they're in prison, and they've, not seen them in the community since, more than 10 years ago. So we have some contact there, and then the families within the community, we're trying to encourage them to be active in pushing for change, and alongside supporting them to try and make sure that they've got access to things that they can use to support their loved ones in prison, as well as the people who have been released, because once people are released, they're under essentially a 99-year licence. Regardless of what crime they committed, they can apply to have it lifted, I think, after 10 years. I think 4 people have managed to do that. So, you're having people recalled back to prison because the licence conditions are quite strict on this. You've been recalled for very minor things often. I think, last year, I think there's 1,300 people in prison on recalls on an IPP at the moment. And I think 70% of those usually get released on their first parole hearing, which is an indicator of the fact that the recall could have been managed in the community if it was even feasible in the first place. So, you know, for us, this inquiry has come at a really good time, and we're really encouraging families and people in prison and out of prison under IPP to try and get involved in, you know, sending in, you know, evidence of how it's affected them and what changes they feel would benefit and impact them. And I think the thing that I want to highlight within this is that anyone we speak to, there's never this kind of sense of, well, I should have never gone to prison. They're always very fair with their approach to this, that they say, I did something, there had to be consequences and I accept that. But actually they need to be, you know, proportionate to what that crime was. And it's gone far beyond that now. And, you know, we hope that this is an indicator that change may be on the horizon.
And just picking up on a particular point you made about recalls, again, just in case some of our audience are not familiar with that term or the process. So, you know, there are people in prison serving IPP who have never been released from prison.
Yeah.
They've just never been able to be released. Maybe their tariff hasn't expired, but more likely maybe they haven't been able to prove they're safe for release, whatever that means in this context. But I think, as you're saying, there are also people who, having been released from prison, have then been subject to what's called recall. So they've actually been returned to prison, just for in some cases, some fairly minor things. I wondered if there may be some examples that you might have of kind of how someone can actually get recalled to prison.
Being late for appointments, someone making an allegation, doesn't have to be proven, you go straight back to prison. You know, we've had people who were stuck in traffic, so they were late for an appointment. Their probation officer couldn't get a hold of them because they lived in a gated community. So these are the reasons. But the thing is that once they go back, they go straight back to prison. They have to have a parole hearing to get re-released, and this takes, I mean, the earliest I've ever heard is 6 months, and that's rare. Most people, it's more than a year. Sometimes it's 2 years, and within that time, you know, they have to still, you know, have no marks on their records, regardless if they're true or not, because obviously when they go into the parole board to get released, that could be used against them. So, you know, they're thrown back into this system where they have to go back to the parole board, they have to wait for parole hearing, they go back to the parole board, and the parole board have to agree whether they should be released back into the community or not. And when they are released, they often will go back into an approved premises. So like, we have people who've been in the community for 8 years, had a mental health crisis, got recalled, didn't commit a crime, and when they came back out, they've got a family, children, they have to go to an approved premises for 3 months. You know, so it just, you know, the recall is as much of an issue as those who have not been released, because it just perpetuates the cycle. And I think, you know, for those who are recalled, they just give up. You know, they kind of get to a point where they're like, what's the point of trying? Because their life is then taken away again.
I mean, it kind of feels a bit like, you know, as someone pointed out to me the other day, it kind of feels like a sort of, almost a form of just collective institutional cruelty, you know, and actually, you know, from Parliament, you know, through civil servants and prison officers, you know, it's not necessarily it's not their fault that someone is in that situation, but they're all in different ways conspiring in what just seems like a really kind of cruel and inhuman set of arrangements, which lots of people agree makes no sense, but there seems no capacity really to just take the obvious step of getting rid of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it was in the House of Lords recently, I think 4, 5, maybe even 8 Lords spoke out about this. You know, so there is a consensus that there's a huge issue and it needs to be fixed, but nobody is willing to take that step to actually do it.
Katrina, did you?
Yeah, I just listening to Donna and Harry, what goes on. I'm aware of like indeterminate sentences, and I know several people who have been served those through community work that I do, and they are incredibly detrimental. But what it brings to me is that this is a money-making system. I'm really sorry to sound very cynical, but if it wasn't about money, this wouldn't be happening. Somebody's making money out of keeping people in prison. Someone's making money out of putting someone in a house for 3 months, even though there's suitable accommodation for them to go into. This isn't about welfare. This isn't about protection of people's safety. If it was, we wouldn't be putting people back in prison where it is unsafe. It's one of probably the most unsafest places. We'd be looking at alternatives. And I think we spoke about policing before, we're now speaking about prisons. I think the conversation really needs to be about reimagining public safety, reimagining how do we want a criminal justice system that is punitive and about punishment and retribution, or do we want a criminal justice system that is about rehabilitation, consequences, providing people with an alternative to the lives that they've been living? And the systems that we're talking about perpetuate the same harms. And unfortunately, they keep people in jobs, people like me who get lots of grey hairs being in our jobs because we're having to challenge the system. But I honestly feel this isn't about the taxpayer feeling safe. This is about private business. This is about politicians who do not have any care or inclination to think about the harms that are being caused by these sorts of punitive processes. So sorry to throw in the cynical hat, but I sit in here. I was like, why is it not changed? It's because somebody obviously is making a lot of money out of this. And there's obviously people in positions of power that, because they're in positions of power, very rarely get arrested and would never probably be given this sort of sentence. So it looks fine on paper. And once again, it comes back to everybody, when they're in the positions of power, they put these things in place. And as soon as they're out, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Stop doing it when you're in the position. Stop trying to win votes in election air. Then you won't have to 20 years later be saying sorry when we've locked up loads of people. So I kind of, listening to Donna, my heart was just getting more and more heavy, because there are people that want to come out and want to live healthy lives. They recognize they've done wrong. They need a second chance. And actually, we've got a shortage of all sorts of Labour people. Instead of keeping them in prison, we should be training people and giving them opportunities for them to serve purposeful lives. And the IPP doesn't do that. So I'm really glad that I'm on this panel with Donna and hearing that the work that they're doing to challenge, because the truth is if the politicians want it to change, it would change tomorrow. It's very easy for it to change, and it will only change when people start to mobilize and continue to raise their voices, because that's where change comes from.
I think as well, on the back end of that as well, just to kind of run very quickly, I think, you know, I go back to the point that, like, this is also affecting a lot of other people. There are children who've not seen their parents in the community for over a decade. You know, they're growing up with no mum or dad, and, you know, so that perpetuates that cycle, you know, or damage being done, and that will continue to happen until something within specific to the IPP changes. I mean, I think Katrina's right, there are huge issues with many things that need to change systematically, but you know, specific to the IPP.
And just in a couple of minutes, there's a question here from Jen Neller. What would be the route to challenging IPP sentences? And then a specific example given is could a case be taken to the European Court of Human Rights? But, you know, just in a minute or so, Donna, because again, time is against us. What are the main options?
At the moment, it is, we are obviously inputting into the Justice Select Committee inquiry, because we feel like they'll make recommendations. There's currently a sentencing bill going through Parliament that doesn't include anything to do with IPP, but we are trying every which way to try and get something included. Whether that happens or not, we don't know. You know, the difficulty with taking it back to the European Court of Human Rights is you have to take it in a different way than it was taken before in order to get change, because it was already taken to be abolished. You can't take the same case back, so you have to look at different options, which we are exploring, but it's very difficult.
Thank you. And if anyone wants more information on the IPP, then you can find lots of useful information on the UNGRIP website, and included there is a discussion of some of the main potential options of reform and sort of, as it were, the pros and cons. But also you can follow the considerations of the Justice Committee. So in due course, I mean, the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies will certainly be submitting evidence. I know UNGRIP will, and indeed, as many people as possible. It'd be really good to submit evidence. So, do have a look at the committee's pages. We'll circulate links about that. The deadline for submissions is the 26th of October. So time is short, but there's still time. And you can then follow the work, the submissions that have been given, and the work of the committee via their website, and we'll share the information on that. All right, moving on, we have a new Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, who replaced Robert Buckland at during the September reshuffle. A bit of a surprise to some, I think, possibly including Mr. Buckland himself, who'd been sat next to the Prime Minister only a few minutes earlier before he was called out to be defenestrated. Now, it's been widely reported that Raab is going to have the Human Rights Act in his sights and a general brief to toughen up justice rhetoric and policy. And indeed, yesterday at the Conservative Party conference, Mr. Raab attacked, quote, criminals abusing human rights laws, and said that the government would overhaul the Human Rights Act to bring this nonsense to an end. Well, is this just party conference rhetoric? Will Mr. Raab's appointment result in a change of substance or merely a change of tone? My colleague Matt Ford's been thinking a bit about this. Matt, what do you make of change?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, when Buckland came in and replaced David Gork, he was sort of at least signalled that he was relatively supportive of, reforming short sentences. And then Johnson took charge of the Tory party and signalled this more authoritarian turn in criminal justice policy, which Buckland then just ran with. So, I mean, kind of suggests he's just a bit of a yes man. And that, like I said, basically it's same, I think he said same business plan, different chief executive. So I don't know if it makes any difference having Raab, who's probably more of a enthusiastic implementer of Johnson's, law and order, authoritarian law and order policies, or just having someone, who wouldn't stand up against them. But similarly, even if, the last kind of relatively, properly liberal Justice Minister we had in Ken Clarke, he was just quickly gotten rid of anyway, as soon as he started to lose votes. So I can't see him making all that much difference.
I mean, the thing about Ken Clarke, I suppose, is also, and I mean, I agree, he is often held up as a kind of something of a liberal, and indeed we were just talking about his remarks on IPP, and he did, push through at least the abolition of future IPP sentences, and has also spoken about how we need a much lower prison population. But then he was also the Justice Secretary who pushed through quite swinging cuts to legal aid, and which have without doubt made it more difficult for individuals to to get access to effective justice in terms of appropriate legal representation. When we had our last week, we had a lunch with Francis Crook, one of our other new webinar formats, and Francis, the outgoing chief exec of the Howard League, with a huge amount of experience over the years of working with different justice and home secretaries, and she kind of mentioned, for example, David Lidington and Michael Gove as examples of rather more progressive justice secretaries, and of course, perhaps in the back of a lot of our minds was some of the more regressive ones, such as Chris Grayling, and in a slightly more dim and distant past, Michael Howard. But again, the question of, does it really make that much difference? Katrina, in before we went live, you were reflecting on the change in personnel. I don't know if you want to offer your thoughts on
that. I was reflecting on it, just to say that, the name may have changed, but I think the direction is going to be the same. This is clear that we have an administration at the moment that is about criminalisation, and they make no bones about it. So if you want the job done, you'll get people in that are happy to do the job. And I think Dominic Raab is happy to do the job. I'm very concerned that what is coming, we already see it with the police crime sentencing courts bill. So they've put the cards on the table, but people won't realise, and this is the problem, is that nobody thinks it's an issue until they need to access justice. And I kind of say it's like the rain doesn't fall on one man's house or one woman's house or one they's house, but be, non-binary. So people shouldn't be waiting for like an issue to happen to them. They really should be mobilising now. And I think the kind of attacks to rights of protest, things like that, it's only going to get worse. So people shouldn't, it's just a change of name, but same direction, same business, just a different day. And I think probably in many ways a distraction, or more to pander to people who feel things should be more to the right, whether they even go to more to the right anyway. I just think it's a distraction. So keeps me in a job, which yeah, I'm happy about, but I would prefer if we had, like, you know, free racist, no racist society, and I could just retire and find my time to do something else. But with this government, and it seems, to be honest, I not being party political, but with, you know, the last 20 years, or for me as a Black person, it doesn't feel like there's been much on either side to tackle, you know, police discrimination, issues with criminal justice. We tinker at the edges, put a new person in, parachute them out. And I think that's where communities get very cynical, we get very tired, because it is just a change of personnel for the institution, but for the communities, the impact of the policies, they stay. So, you know, I don't know, does he get more money for this job? Is it more money than his last one? What's in it for him?
Well, I think he certainly lost access to his nice grace and favour mansion that came with being Foreign Secretary. So I think he certainly experienced something of a demotion. But, you know, I mean, just I suppose, you know, playing devil's advocate here, you know, given the institutional inertia, I mean, you know, we were talking just now about IPP and the fact that plenty of people recognise as a problem, including, you know, quite senior, powerful people, but still nothing seems to be done about it. Is there an argument that, you know, for saying that actually, even if the new Justice Secretary is going to be banging on about doing something about the Human Rights Act and talking tough here and tough there, the reality of the situation is that regardless of who's actually the Secretary of State for Justice, the institutions below them carry on much as before. And this is true both if you have a genuinely reforming Justice Secretary who really does want to make a positive difference, but also potentially true of maybe one who kind of wants to, you know, do the kinds of things that might leave many of us thinking, oh, really? That actually, you know, their life, the time they have in office is relatively finite, and the institutions just kind of adapt around them. Is there any truth in that? I mean, it's maybe a slightly pessimistic way of looking at it in some ways.
I think to some degree, but I think with policy, I mean, with some policy, things do change. I mean, you know, the IPP is an example of that. You know, if you change policy to that degree, you're going to have an increase in the prison population. So, you know, if there is a significant change with the human rights, if they do put a bill forward and change human rights access, that's definitely going to have an impact. Despite things carrying on as normal around them, it will limit people's access to things or stop people from doing things, again, such as the protesting. You know, if that bill, part of the bill does go through, that is going to have an impact. So I think it kind of does in some ways change, and others not so much.
Because, I mean, you know, in relation to IPP, I mean, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I mean, Dominic Raab today could effectively sign an order giving executive release to every single IPP prisoner. I mean, that's something that's within his powers. Whether it's politic for him to do it is another matter, but it's within his powers to. And it's not completely absurd to think that a very far-sighted Justice Secretary with a progressive agenda might do exactly that.
I think that Donna and I should, like, well, look at our own party and get in there and just do this. If it's a matter of just signing the piece of paper, let's just do that, because that's exactly what I mean. Everyone speaks about, oh, it takes so much time. It doesn't. It's just goodwill. It's bold. It's brave. And you have to be willing to maybe lose a couple of votes. But if you let all those people out, depending on where they live, they might vote for you. So you might not have lost any at all.
I think it goes back to, as well, like you said before, I think, you know, different Justice Secretary doesn't make a difference, because with this current party, they are dancing to the tune they're told to dance to from above, and I don't think it will matter. You know, that is the way things are right now, unfortunately. So even if they did want to do that, I think they may well be told that they can't.
Okay, thank you. The comment here by Gabrielle Watson, I won't read it all, anyone can see it in Q&A. It's been refreshing that this seminar has juxtaposed the issues of policing and prison. Too often they are discussed in isolation, much to be gained by bringing them together. So thank you, Gabrielle, that's a really kind remark that you make, and you're certainly, you know, the intention of these and future webinars is that we can look across the different elements of the criminal justice system and explore their interactions, and think about how change in one part is having an impact on other areas. And you know, this is, I think, going to be true of whoever is the Justice Secretary, and indeed whoever is the Home Secretary. So thank you for that comment. Let's move on to our next item, which is on the police taser use. So slightly outside our remit, because we were only really discussing developments in September, and it's a report that the Independent Office of Police Conduct published in August on the police use of tasers. But we thought it was important enough to break our self-imposed restrictions on months, so we wanted to just talk about it today, this morning. So tasers, as I'm sure most people here will know, they're electroshock weapons that the police can use to incapacitate suspects. They were fired at members of the public more than 3,000 times last year, and indeed their use has been growing. And the Independent Office of Police Conduct warned that the police risked losing legitimacy if public concerns over taser use were not addressed. High-profile cases of taser use which have gone horrendously wrong. I mean, if there's a right way to use a taser, well, maybe discuss, but some awful examples. The former footballer Dalian Atkinson, who died after being tasered for over 30 seconds and was then kicked twice in the head by a police officer. And in another case, the police in Bristol shot one of their own race relations advisors, Judah Adunbi, in the face with a taser in what they said was a case of mistaken identity. So it remains a very controversial weapon at the hands of the police, but certainly one that is likely to be used more in the future, I suspect. Katrina, what's your assessment of the current state of play in relation to policy and practice?
Okay, so Unjust sits on the National Taser Stakeholder Advisory Group, so I'll just kind of throw that in there. So I should give a bit of background. Last year, I was CEO of Stopwatch, and we sat on the National Taser Advisory Group, and we left, rightfully so, because it was not picking up issues about racial discrimination, let me call it racial disparity, racism, in there. So we left. Fast forward now, I've joined back for a couple of reasons. It's, I'm not part of Stopwatch anymore, and I need to have access to information about what's going on. So for me as an organisation, I need to be entered in that space to understand what's happening. Sadly, the issues about racial disparity still, for me, aren't being raised in the way that they should be. And I think what led me to want to go back into that space was a high profile case last year. So my background in policing has been around stop and search and community engagement and knowing your rights and police accountability. And last year in Tottenham, there was a young man called Jordan Walker-Brown who had been stopped and searched. And he was tasered as he was standing on a wall away from the police. He fell off of that wall because when you're tasered, your body becomes incapacitated, and he fell off the wall, and he's now paralyzed as a consequence of that police interaction. I want to fast forward to why he ran. Was I believe he had been stopped and searched maybe a month or so before, and he was found to be in possession of small level of cannabis, drug stop. So when he saw the police again, he ran because he probably had drugs on him, because if you smoke weed and you like it, you're probably going to keep smoking weed. That's what you do. If you like, alcohol, you drink alcohol. So he ran, and that's why the police tasered him, because he was running away. And I think that's probably, it's really absurd, because if someone's running from you, it doesn't feel like they're a threat. You probably need to run a bit quicker to catch them. But how police are using tasers, big issue. And then when we kind of in these meetings, we're challenging officers around, why do you think this happens? How does it happen? The response is very much officers are fearful in the moment. So having this, gives them confidence, and, the public are unpredictable. And I get all of those things. However, tasers are weapons and they can kill, they have killed. So just because you feel unsafe, for me, doesn't warrant you using your taser. It needs to be proportionate. The person needs to be a threat. And then we heard, actually, more white people were tasered than black people, which is probably true, but there's still a disparity. And what I found in speaking to officers was actually more black people were red dotted. So when they saw the taser, they actually stopped, which for me, actually, if we follow this lane of argument, following it through, was it that the other white people didn't feel that they would be tasered because they didn't feel that, affinity bias meant that actually you've taken it out, but you won't use it. So it was just this interesting conversation about who complies, who doesn't comply, because it was like, well, actually we taser more white people. And that's probably because black people are fearful you're going to taser us. So we just stop. So we don't push the boat anymore because you put the red dot on us. And getting that thinking into what makes officers use tasers in mental health situations? You've been called to a situation, someone's in a crisis, you're now going to taser them. I think we just, once again, it comes back to, and I'm going to bang on about this, reimagining public safety and policing. What do we want from the service? What are we trying to achieve? And I don't want the police to come if I'm in a mental health crisis, because I'm probably going to be much more scared. I don't want them to come with a baton, with a taser, with CS gas. It's a lot of armory for usually people who are in need of help and protection. And if the police feel threatened, they'll use that, even though it wasn't just, from our perspective, it isn't justified. So I think we really must stop. We just have to stop. We need to not increase taser use. We should be banning taser use on children. You know, it should be illegal. You shouldn't be using tasers on anyone under the age of 18, but also because of the health concerns, people don't all present their medical conditions with a sticker on their forehead saying, I have a pacemaker. So you have to be aware that when you are engaging with people, they may have health conditions, may have learning disabilities that make that engagement more difficult, and you just having a taser and using it isn't going to work. So yeah, I read the report. I was, what's the word? There's lots of great recommendations. I'm sick of reading reports and having recommendations. I want actions. So yes, the report is welcomed. Yes, it's highlighted great things, but actually, I can't go into Tottenham and tell people, here's an IOPC report, have a read. They're like, my son's paralyzed. So I think we really need to, yes, we need an evidence base, but actually we need pragmatic action. We need bravery, and we need the public to start saying, no, this isn't acceptable and we need a change. So yeah, I'm really glad you raised the taser stuff. I know it's a bit old hat news because it was August, but the impact of that, but actually it's not, because we had a police officer, it was the first conviction in 30 years, I think, over 30 years. And that was because a man was killed at the hands of a taser, and that's our first police conviction. So it is really pertinent, it's timely. And with the police getting more resources, I think we really need to start questioning, where do those go? What is the benefit? You know, could we not be investing in, you know, de-escalation and conflict management solutions? And I don't think that should just be in the street. I think those things should be in schools, because if you don't want people to get angry, you need to teach them how to manage their emotions. You need that is taught, you know, that is, you don't know how to do that until someone shows you different ways of doing it. So rather than investing in police having more armory to be protected, let's put systems and processes in place from a really young age in schools, in our workplaces, everywhere, where we know how to manage conflict, so we don't need to have such an armored police force that more and more is looking like an army to me.
Thank you. And I mean, one of the arguments I've heard, I'm sure Katrina, you've heard it as well, from police officers is, well, you know, you say that about tasers, but they're actually, it's much better to have a taser than, at least they're not being shot by a gun. And, you know, I've got a baton, and batons can break bones. Or we can get in a grapple, and that can be dangerous for me as well as for them. And so actually, in the arsenal of policing weaponry, tasers are quite good to have, as long as they're used responsibly and sensibly. And I just kind of wonder whether, you know, I mean, what do you think of that argument in particular? But is there ever a sensible or a good use of a taser?
Okay, so there probably is. All right, so I sit on the fence with this, is because my heart and soul tells me that I don't want a police force. I really want to look to reimagine a world where those people who serve us as police officers can do something other than that with their lives. That's what I would really want. But we're not in that space. And there are dangerous people that do want to do not just the police harm, society harm. So there needs to be a gap between how do we get to that reimagined space and where we are now. So yes, there are situations where a taser probably is required. I don't think there's like 3,000 of them though. So that's the thing, it's the proportionality, it's the decision-making that's being told, but also there's a rhetoric around tough on crime, criminals. I think it's the culture of policing that needs to be challenged, not necessarily the taser itself. You know, the taser is only as dangerous as the person whose hand it's in. So I think it's not saying let's do away with everything to the extent I am kind of an Angela Davis. Yes, get rid of prisons, get rid of police. Yes, I'm putting it on the table. However, I'm a pragmatic realist. That's not where we're at. And I do want people to feel safe. I feel most people, and I say most, that's a lie. Lots of people will feel safe. They did it up until Severn Everard. But the people that I come into contact with, people that are over police, racialized communities, police having tasers don't make them feel safe. They're really worried that they say the wrong thing and they could be at the end of that taser because of the culture of policing. and lack of understanding around how you de-escalate situations. And also everyone's saying the police are going to be attacked, so you leave feeling very on edge as a police officer, I can imagine. So I think we just need to stop a bit, understand, yes, there are cases, but they shouldn't be the norm. And this expansion of giving tasers to like potentially special constables or just anybody, I don't think it's like, you need to be trained. You need to have an understanding of what it is to use. And if police officers who are trained still don't know how to use them properly, then why are we going to keep expanding them to more people?
There's a comment here from anonymous attendee. How can you bring attention to wrongdoings to do with the law if you've been made to feel voiceless? And, you know, taking sort of, as it were, chair's prerogative here, I think probably one answer to that is to connect up with organisations like Unjust and Ungrip, you know, doing really important work and providing a vehicle for, you know, for people to kind of work together to address, you know, some of these significant injustices. So do look them up. You know, there's this thing called Google, and it works really well in my experience. So look them up and get in touch with them. Right, moving on to our penultimate item, looking at police spying. So last week, Kate Wilson, an activist deceived into a relationship with an undercover police officer, won a court case for breach of her human rights. The same human rights, no doubt, that Dominic Raabs thinks need to be reviewed. The case revealed disturbing and lamentable failings at the most fundamental level, including complicity with abuse. This is complicity by other officers. We are driven to the conclusion, the judges declare, that either senior officers were quite extraordinarily naive, totally unquestioning, or chose to turn a blind eye. The judges went on to argue that this is not just a case about a renegade police officer who took advantage of his undercover deployment to indulge his sexual proclivities. Now, the ruling was a result of a decade-long battle by Kate Wilson to uncover the truth. But why does it take so long for victims of abusive police actions to get a semblance of justice? Matt, you've been having a bit of a think about this as well, building in part on some of the work that we've been doing at the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies over the years. So share us some thoughts with us now.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we've done about 3 reports on this. I wasn't working on them, but my colleague Helen Mills, a research fellow we had, who looked into this in quite a lot of detail. Like I say, I mean, I don't have all that much knowledge about it, I suppose, which is one of the problems. I mean, in the ruling, the judge said that most of this wouldn't have come to light unless Kate Wilson, who's spoken at a conference we actually did on police spying a few years ago, and other women who were entered into sort of false relationships, state abuse and rape, hadn't, you know, fought to get the truth. But I just want to kind of, but I mean, that's one of the problems. I mean, you know, the police have been found to be, you know, intentionally shredding evidence about this, you know, to avoid it going to the inquiry. They've been constantly obstructive. The inquiry has taken a long time to progress, purely because the police are really spending a lot of money and fighting very hard for each officer to have anonymity in the inquiry. So protecting their own. And that's obviously from the top, you know, they're sanctioning that from the top. I just want to say how kind of like serious some of the breaches of the Kate Wilson's human rights were as well. So they, by the Met, it includes inhuman and degrading treatment, sexist discrimination, and interference with my rights with Kate Wilson's rights to hold political opinions and to freedom of expression and association. So incredibly serious. And in the judges summing up, they seem to countenance that it could possibly be senior officers turning a blind eye to undercover officers entering into sexual relationships with these women. They didn't seem to countenance that it might be explicitly sanctioned from the top. And given some of the other practices which were being sanctioned, which have literally led to some of the cases against some of the activists, you know, criminal cases being thrown out because it was basically entrapment, then, you know, it's a very likely possibility. But as an article by Kate Wilson in The Guardian, you know, says, the first inquiry found the Met Police to be institutionally racist. The recent inquiry into the Daniel Morgan case found me to be institutionally corrupt. And this and Sarah Everard and some of the things which are emerging out of Sarah Everard, probably showing that it's, you know, obvious, and the way they dealt with, you know, allegations of rape before, as in the community, not taking them seriously, not recording them properly, which was one of the reasons they lost their policing statistics, lost their official statistic status in 2014. They're probably, seen to be found officially to be institutionally sexist. And I think it's probably time that we think about whether the Metropolitan Police is fit for purpose, never mind in need of reform.
Thank you, Matt. I mean, Katrina, it's Kate Wilson's case, and there are many. I mean, there's a number. This is just one. I mean, it's horrendous, isn't it? I mean, it's just an extraordinary abuse of power.
I kind of feel like I'm in some sort of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy thing, like this kind of Carrier novel, and actually not. It's 21st century Britain, and this is what's happening. If this is when you referred, Matt, about the police being deemed institutionally racist, for me, once you're institutionally racist, you're institutionally corrupt. So the Morgan case, and we say, oh my gosh, they're institutionally corrupt, mate. I could have told you that 40 years ago. Like, it's quite clear. If you're racist, you're corrupt. Racism is corruptible behavior. You may not be taking money or doing this, but that tenet of corruption is racism. So I'm not surprised, but I think once again, coming back to, God rest her soul, Sarah, is the police have an issue with sexism, misogyny. Women are not seen as equals, it seems, and they're seen as being able to be manipulated pawns within political inquiries, within police inquiries, which is really sad because internally people aren't being treated right, externally they're not being treated right, and there's no one to challenge it. So I'm hoping that the truth is that I don't expect the system to change the system, because that's counterintuitive for the system. But as all of these, ghosts come out of the closet, that people come to understand why there has been, for generations now, I can only speak from kind of the Windrush era coming in as modern Britain, communities that have come here and been so distrusting of the police and the state, not because, they just don't like them. It's because of their lived experiences and those treatments. And it's cases like these that happen, and I'll just call it out, predominantly to white women who are seen as the bastion of the society, who shouldn't be treated like this. When it happens to them, it means it can happen to anybody. So I don't want it to happen to them, but the more of these cases that happen, I believe we can build some real strong allyship that actively mobilizes to ensure that the lived experiences of everybody have value and that we bring the change about. But usually when it's, the Lawrence family that happened to, their son was, he might have been a drug dealer anyway, who was murdered. It might have, that's the perception. When you hear, white women who fall, blameless, innocent, unfortunately, because of the racist society we live in, the sexist society, and that shifts a thinking in most people, because it means that they think that could be me. They have an affinity bias to it. So I'm glad these things are coming to light, because it means justice can be served. I'm very angry that this has happened to women for generations, but actually really, really glad that people like Kate have come out and said, not on my watch, this is enough. And that I'm hoping other women will listen to those women and get behind, and we can create that change. But it's not going to come from the system. So yeah, keep telling us the stories, keep, getting in touch with people like Ungrit, Unjust, because without the cases, the advocacy, we don't exist, and we exist to challenge. So yeah, it's sad, but actually I'm really glad that the rulings happened and that we know more about it, and that other women feel confident to come forward and question policing. And that's the issue. We don't question stuff. Thing goes wrong, we have to question. It's not annoying to question. That's being an active citizen, to hear your voice. I think we really need to get out of this paternalistic relationship we have with the police, and that them being all things and all great, and get into one where you are, but actually we could be better.
And the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies has also done some work in this area, as Matt mentioned. And indeed, we collaborated with the monitoring group, which will be known to a number of you. And indeed, members of the monitoring group were themselves subject to police spying. And we did a few events with them where we have videos of people talking about their experiences of being spied on, so we can share some information about that and about some of the wider issues. But yeah, I endorse really what you say, Katrina. We do need people to come forward and challenge this. At the same time, it's for many people this took 10 years, and it takes a huge amount of energy to challenge these things, as I think Donna's found working on the area of IPP, and Katrina, as you found in your own work as well. Right, well, moving on to our final item. Over the summer, the Institute of Contemporary Arts hosted War in a Babylon, the Community's Struggle for Truth and Rights, an exhibition chronicling the impact of various forms of state violence and institutional racism targeted at Britain's Black communities since the mass arrival upon invitation of West Indian immigrants in the late 1940s. The exhibition was curated by the London-based racial advocacy and community organisation Tottenham Rights, together with independent curators Camara Scott and Rihanna Jade Parker. It closed at the end of September, unfortunately, but it attracted more than 3,000 visitors in its final week. The exhibition included original tributes from victims' families, case studies of controversial sus laws and the gang's matrix, and highlighted legal developments that have resulted from Black justice campaigns. And I was very lucky to actually go to see the exhibition before it closed with colleagues. And we spent a number of hours there, and it had a big impact on all of us, actually, and led to quite a lot of discussion and reflection amongst the staff group. Now, the organisers are hoping to tour the exhibition, so it may well turn up in a town near you soon, and I very much hope it will do. But Katrina, you were one of the speakers at the programme of events that ran alongside the main exhibition, and I just wonder if you have some reflections really on the importance of this exhibition, because I mean it was a really big and significant exhibition with a lot of very important archive footage and tracking a lot of developments over time.
Yeah, so I really want to shout out Stafford Scott, curator. Stafford has been a long-time campaigner. I was really fortunate in my time at Stopwatch to share an office with Stafford, so I kind of had a bit of awe. You know, you watch someone on Channel 4 and you see them speaking, oh my God, I'm in an office with them, so it's a bit of a fan moment. So I have a lot of respect for Stafford, and the reason I say this in a comment I wrote about fighting injustice is tiring and it's costly. For many people, they go into a profession, you know, you're a lawyer or something, it's your job. When it's your community, you kind of you didn't choose it, you're thrust into that position. So I really think I want to commend Stafford. Anyone that's met Stafford, he leaves a lasting impression on you. And I think when you understand the history and the journey that Black communities, specifically that of the Broadwater Farm, have gone through, and men in their from the 80s that were criminalized under sus laws, even though they did nothing wrong, no victim, no anything, you understand the pain, and you understand how that's used as fuel to keep fighting injustice. And it was so beautiful and astonishing to see the exhibition in its glory. This is a year of a pandemic. People were shielding, doing all sorts, and yet Stafford and the team were able to pull together a wonderful collection of testimonies. It had visual, it had audio, it had pamphlets from the 80s. And the idea was not for it to sit in, you know, some community space, which is very important, I think. Actually, it was down the road from Her Majesty the Queen. You know, it was in a space which is not usually frequented by Black, Asian, minority communities, unless we're just, you know, bringing our family down to Buckingham Palace. We're not in central London like that. But actually, the people that need to understand this they do pass the ICA. They are saying, oh, what are we going to do on a Saturday? And then going in and seeing that. And I think I'm about shifting the narrative, and the narrative won't be shifted unless we start to engage with people and their minds and showing the history. A report is excellent. We'll keep writing them at Unjust, but actually those public exhibitions allow people to understand the information in their own way. You give someone a report, it takes some time for them to read it. There's things, it's boring, I stop. You go there, you submerge yourself in it, and you leave. I have to say I cried. I went 4 times, and I did cry a couple of times because of the heaviness. And I think it was speaking to what we're saying. It took Kate 10 years. There's people in the community still haven't got justice, and it's been, you know, 40 years. But I think that struggle for truth and rights, as Stafford calls it, is very important for people to understand. This isn't a lefty thing, a righty thing. This is a human justice case. This is about people being wronged by the state, not having very many avenues to express that wrong, and needing support from people who haven't been wronged, who think the state is perfect, and us coming together. So when you said you visited, Richard, I was really happy to hear that, because I think people working in this criminal justice space, and then want to speak about racial disparity, it's not enough to have a couple of Black people on your board. It's not enough to, you know, invite. We need to be in those things. You need to go into those spaces and feel it and understand it and place yourself in it. You know, it is, yes, it's a job, but actually, if you want to make the change, it's what you do outside of your job. It's how you bring that information and inform your thinking to be able to advocate in those high policy rooms. So yeah, thousands of people when I think that it broke ICA records in August, and I come back to a year of a pandemic, people, you know, weren't going anywhere. So if you haven't seen it, you should definitely be writing to Tottenham Rights and saying, yep, how do we get it in our area? How do we support? It needs to be seen by everybody, because it was a fantastic, absolutely fantastic exhibition of the struggle of Black communities across England. Although it focused on Border Farm, it did highlight how different communities responded. And I just want to say thank you to Stafford, because it's tiring doing this work. And when you do it, not because you want to do it, you do it because you don't feel you cannot do it. It's a tireless, and you know, I just want to say thank you to Stafford. So if anybody's watching, I really implore you, have a look at the ICA website. They still have some bits on there. And thank you, Richard, for mentioning it, because far too often these things don't get highlighted. So although it's finished, I think it's just really important that we commend the effort it took to put it on, and also to speak about racism and injustice outside of a report, to make it real for people, to give people that agency and that advocacy, I think was just phenomenal. So thank you, Stafford.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, and actually, I remember talking with Stafford. This was before lockdown, you know, when he was planning the exhibition, and then of course it got disrupted by lockdown. And I was delighted that, you know, that it was still able to be had. And yeah, I mean, it really stuck with me. You know, there's a lot. I mean, both the scope of it, you know, from the 1940s to virtually the present day, but also lots of individual moments. There's a wonderful clip of, you know, the great and late Bernie Grant talking in Parliament about racism, and you know, something very powerful about what he said there. And I think possibly my favourite moment was Darcus Howe challenging a BBC interviewer, accused him of being a rioter, and he said, and he just challenged her back. This was during the course of the riots in 2011, or the demonstrations. And he said then, stop accusing me of being a rioter and have some respect for an old West Indian Negro, because you wanted for me to get abusive. You just sound idiotic. Have some respect. And it was a wonderful moment, actually. And I mean, really, I feel quite emotional just repeating it now, actually. But it's always a wonderful exhibition. And I do very much hope that it will be shown in other venues. Donna, you had some, I think you wanted to say something.
I just think, kind of going back to Katrina, so I think, you know, it's a great way for people who've been directly affected by things in their life to have a platform to share that and to be seen, because often I think people just don't feel seen, and, you know, especially by people who are penalising them in that way. So I think, you know, it's a great way to do that, and it's real, because it's not just in a report, you know, it's visual. So it hits people in a very different way. So I think it's great. Yeah.
And I think going back to what Gabrielle said about, you know, the importance of connecting issues up, you know, not seeing them in isolation. So for sure, the exhibition was about policing, and it was about the policing of Black communities. But it was about so much more than that. It was about trying to situate it, I think, within the sort of the wider history of those communities and their reception, you know, by you know, white communities who, you know, in many cases did not make them feel welcome at all, you know, and some of the kind of the challenges that come from that. So, well, it was a really excellent exhibition, and I think it's a great tribute to the ICA for holding it as well. And as you say, Katrina, a great tribute to Stafford for having the energy to put it together and to keep it going, because it must have been a real challenge.
Richard, just before I want to just read a quote. It said, in the Jamaicans, you have a people who are constitutionally disordered. It's simply in their makeup. They're constitutionally disposed to be anti-authority. And that was Kenneth Newman in 1982. That's like 40 years ago. So when we speak about how long things take, that's like head of the Met. That sort of stuff ripples down. Those people then become head of the Met, and it perpetuates. And that was only 40 years ago. I'd hope that, you know, probably Cressida wouldn't get caught saying it on record, but those sorts of sentiments, they persist. And that's why it takes 10 years for a woman who was spied on to get justice. That's why it takes 20 odd years nearly for the Lawrence family to get their murderers of their sons convicted, because of the perceptions of people in power. And I feel this sort of platform is fantastic for us to highlight those, have discussions about why we are challenging and why we exist. And thank you for bringing us together for that.
Well, no, thank you, Katrina, and thank you, Donna, for really excellent presentations, and thank you, Matt, of course, as well. It was a really good discussion. We are out of time, so I'd like to thank also the audience for their thoughts and questions. We're going to be holding our next one of these events on the 3rd of November, where we'll be reviewing and discussing the developments of criminal justice during October. And we also have a number of other events during the course of October, including Suresh Grover and Pragna Patel, who will be speaking about mid-month. They'll be our next lunch with guests, and we'll be talking about the long struggle for racial justice. I'm very much looking forward to that one. Do look on our website for more information about that event. But for now, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for everyone who participated in this inaugural last month in criminal justice. I think it went just about as well as I was hoping it would go. So I'd like to thank everybody for their participation, and hopefully see you at the next one.